The arrow whistled past Ethan Hatch's ear, embedding itself in the wooden post behind him with a sickening thud. Around him, the colony's marketplace erupted into chaos as raiders poured through the broken gates, their blue-painted faces twisted with savage glee. "Get down," he roared, pushing the two small figures behind an overturned cart. The older girl, barely 6 years old with skin the color of winter sky, clutched her 3-year-old sister protectively. Both of them trembling, but silent. 3 months. That's all the peace they'd had since he'd bought them at that damned auction. 3 months of building something resembling a family, and now the scavenger clans had found Marcera Colony. Ethan drew his sword, the steel singing as it cleared its leather sheath. A raider with filed teeth and scars crisscrossing his arms and charged him with a crude spear. Ethan sidestepped, Bovine, his blade finding the gap between ribs. The man dropped gurgling blood onto the dusty ground. "Papa Ethan!" Kira, the older girl, pointed with a shaking finger. More raiders were pouring through the marketplace, torching stalls and cutting down anyone who resisted. "Stay here," he commanded. But even as he said it, he knew they couldn't. The cart wouldn't hide them for long, and the smoke was getting thicker. Behind them, a woman's scream cut through the air. Ethan's jaw clenched. Mrs. Holloway from the bakery. She'd given the girls sweet rolls just yesterday, ruffling their strange blue hair with flour-dusted hands. "We have to move," he said grimly. "Can you both run?" Little Zara nodded, her large golden eyes wide with fear but trusting. She'd barely spoken when he'd first brought them home, but in 3 months she'd learned to trust his voice above all others. Another arrow struck the ground near his feet. Ethan grabbed both girls' hands and ran. The slave market had stunk of unwashed bodies, fear and greed 3 months earlier. Ethan had come to Marcera's black market looking for information about his missing brother's whereabouts, not to buy children. But when he saw them, two small blue-skinned girls huddled together on the auction block, something inside his chest twisted. "Two healthy specimens," the auctioneer had bellowed, his voice carrying over the jeering crowd. "Zirian stock, bred for endurance. The older ones already house-trained." Someone threw a rotten vegetable at the platform. The 6-year-old girl, Kira, he'd later learn, stepped protectively in front of her sister, her chin raised defiantly despite her obvious terror. "Don't take her, she's only 3, Kira had said, her accented English surprisingly clear. The crowd laughed. A fat merchant in silk robes called out, "I'll take the older one for farm work. Keep the little one for spare parts." That's when Ethan stepped forward, his weathered hand dropping a heavy pouch of silver coins at the auctioneer's feet. "Both," he said in a voice that brooked no argument. The merchant protested, but something in Ethan's pale eyes, something that spoke of violence barely contained, made him step back. The auctioneer, greed overcoming sense, snatched up the coins. "Sold!" As Ethan led the girls away from the platform, Kira looked up at him with suspicious golden eyes. "Why did you buy us?" "Because nobody else should have," he replied simply. Now, as they ran through the burning marketplace with arrows whistling around them, those 3 months of careful trust building were being put to their ultimate test. The cabin on the outskirts of Marcera Colony had been small but clean. Ethan had built it himself from local timber and stone, preferring the honest work of his hands to the prefabricated metal structures most colonists lived in. It smelled of wood smoke and the herbs he grew in small pots on the windowsills. The girls had never seen a real bed before. They'd slept on stone floors in holding cells, huddled together for warmth. When Ethan showed them the 2 small beds he'd hastily constructed, complete with rough but clean blankets, Zara burst into tears. "What's wrong?" Ethan had asked, kneeling down to her level. "It's too nice," she whispered in her tiny voice. "They'll take it away." Kira translated, though she spoke decent English herself. "She thinks it's a trick. The masters before, they gave us food and beds, then took them away when we were bad." Ethan's hands clenched into fists, but his voice remained gentle. "This isn't a trick. This is your home now. These are your beds, your blankets. Nobody's taking them away." That first night, he sat in a chair by the door with his hunting knife across his knees, listening to their quiet whispers in their native tongue. They were afraid he'd sell them in the night, afraid he'd hurt them, afraid to hope. By morning, exhaustion had finally claimed them. Ethan found them curled together in one bed, Zara's small fist tangled in Kira's hair. Something he thought dead in his chest stirred back to life. 2 weeks into their new life, danger came calling in the form of a pack of blue-furred wolves. The native predators of Marsara were larger than earth wolves, with intelligent amber eyes and pack-hunting instincts that had claimed dozens of colonists over the years. Ethan woke to their howling just before dawn, the sound raising every hair on his arms. Through the window he could see glowing eyes circling the cabin, at least 6 of them. He grabbed his sword and a hunting spear, moving quietly to avoid waking the girls. But as he reached for the door latch, he heard a small voice behind him. "There are 8 of them," Kira whispered, standing in her nightgown with Zara clinging to her leg. "They hunt in circles, then attack from behind when their prey runs." Ethan paused, impressed despite the danger. "How do you know that?" "On our homeworld, we had similar pack hunters. Blue furs, we called them. They took my parents." The weight of that simple statement hit him like a physical blow. These children had seen their parents killed by predators, then been captured and sold as slaves. Yet here was Kira, sharing tactical information that might save their lives. "What else do you know about them?" he asked. "They fear fire and loud noises together. And," she hesitated, "if you kill their leader, the others will test you. If you prove stronger, they sometimes join instead of fight." A wolf's snarl came from just outside the door, followed by the scrape of claws on wood. Ethan made a decision that would have seemed insane to any other colonist. "Can you make fire?" he asked Kira. She nodded, already moving toward the fireplace. "Good. When I open this door, I want you to bang every pot, every tool you can find. Make as much noise as possible, and keep the fire bright." He kicked open the door just as Kira struck flint to tinder. The nearest wolf, massive and scarred across the muzzle, lunged at him with jaws that could snap a man's spine. Ethan met its charge with his spear, the point taking it in the chest, but its momentum bowled him over. They rolled in the dirt, the wolf's claws raking across his leather vest while he fought to keep its teeth from his throat. Behind him, Kira was banging cooking pots together while Zara fed the fire, creating a cacophony that had the other wolves backing away and whining. The pack leader was strong, but Ethan was stronger. He'd survived 2 wars and a dozen wilderness expeditions. He'd buried his wife and unborn child, lost his brother to this harsh world, and still kept going. He would not be stopped by wolves. His knife found the beast's heart, and it collapsed with a final shuddering breath. For a long moment, man and remaining wolves stared at each other across the bloody ground. Then, one by one, the pack approached. Not to attack, but to sniff at their fallen leader and at Ethan himself. The largest of the remaining wolves, a female with intelligent eyes, nuzzled Ethan's bloody hand and then lay down at his feet. "They've accepted you as pack leader," Kira said in amazement. "I've never seen that with blue furs before." From that night forward, the wolves became irregular visitors to the cabin. They never fully domesticated, but they respected the territory around Ethan's home and sometimes brought fresh kills to share. Zara named the female leader Frost for her pale blue coat, and would sometimes be found curled against the wolf's warm fur on cold mornings. Word of the wolf encounter spread through Marsara colony like wildfire, and with it came unwanted attention. Colonial Administrator Pierce, a thin man with nervous eyes and soft hands, arrived at Ethan's door with 2 armed guards. "Mr. Hatch," Pierce said, mopping sweat from his brow despite the cool morning air, "there are concerns about your household situation." Ethan stood in his doorway, blocking their view of the girls who were feeding Frost strips of dried meat behind him. "What concerns?" "Well, for starters, you're harboring non-human refugees without proper documentation. And there are reports of you consorting with dangerous predators. Some colonists feel threatened." "Some colonists," Ethan said carefully, "should mind their own business." One of the guards, a young man with more enthusiasm than sense, stepped forward. "You can't just keep aliens as pets, old man. There are laws." His words were cut off as Kira appeared beside Ethan, her chin raised in that same defiant gesture from the auction block. But now she wore clean clothes, her blue hair was braided neatly, and her golden eyes blazed with a fierce intelligence. "I am not a pet," she said clearly. "I am Kira Hatch. This is my father, and this is my home." Pierce blinked in surprise. Your father, but you're clearly Syrian. Blood doesn't make family, Ethan interrupted. Choice does. These are my daughters, legally adopted under colonial law. If you have a problem with that, take it up with Judge Morrison. The administrator's face flushed red. Everyone knew Morrison, the colony's only legal authority, was Ethan's old war buddy. This isn't over, Hatch. Mark my words. As the officials retreated, Kira slipped her small hand into Ethan's calloused one. Will they try to take us away? Over my dead body, he said simply. Over the following weeks, Ethan began teaching the girls the skills they'd need to survive on Marsarsara. The planet was harsh and unforgiving, with predators that could hunt in packs, weather that could turn deadly in minutes, and terrain that had claimed countless unprepared colonists. Kira proved to have natural talent, but more importantly, she had the discipline to practice relentlessly. Every morning before dawn, she would spend an hour drawing her small practice bow, building the strength in her arms and shoulders. Her keen eyesight was an advantage, but it was her patience and determination that truly impressed Ethan. On my homeworld, she explained one afternoon as she practiced with targets at increasing distances, the Blue Cloaks taught all children to hunt from the time we could walk. Those who couldn't learn quickly enough didn't survive the culling seasons. Her first successful shot at 50 yards had taken 3 weeks of daily practice. By the end of her second month with Ethan, she could hit a target the size of a dinner plate at that distance 4 times out of 5. What were the Blue Cloaks? Ethan asked, helping her adjust her stance. The priests of the hunt. They said the gods gave us mind and skill to balance against the predator's strength and speed. Her expression darkened. They're all dead now. The slavers killed them first, said they made the children hard to break. Zara was too small for weapons training, but she had other gifts that became apparent as the weeks passed. Her hearing was incredibly acute. She could identify different bird calls and knew which ones meant danger was approaching. More importantly, she had an almost supernatural ability to calm injured animals. When Ethan brought home a wounded rabbit caught in a snare, Zara approached it without fear. The creature, which had been struggling frantically, grew still under her gentle touch. She hummed a soft melody in her native tongue while Ethan cleaned and bandaged the wound. She sings the old songs, Kira explained. Mother said Zara had the gift of the peaceful voice. Even savage beasts would grow calm when she sang. The rabbit recovered and was released back into the wild, but the incident made Ethan realize that both girls had inherited abilities that made them uniquely suited for survival on this alien world. They weren't just learning to survive, they were learning to thrive. But their peaceful development was shattered on that morning when the scavenger raiders struck the colony. Now, as they ran through the burning marketplace with arrows whistling around them, those skills were being put to their ultimate test. The North Gate, Ethan shouted over the noise of battle. We can reach the forest if... A crossbow bolt punched through his shoulder, spinning him around. He stumbled, cursing, as the blood began to soak his shirt. Papa Ethan! Kira caught his arm, steadying him. I'm fine, he lied. The bolt had gone clean through, but it had missed the major arteries. He'd live if they could get out of this massacre. A group of raiders had spotted them and were giving chase, whooping and waving crude weapons. Ethan counted at least 6, maybe more behind the smoke. They reached the colony's north gate to find it blocked by burning wreckage. The scavengers had been thorough in their attack, cutting off all obvious escape routes. The wall, Kira said, pointing to a section where the wooden palisade had been damaged in a recent storm. We can climb through there. But as they approached the gap, 3 raiders emerged from the smoke, blocking their path. The leader was a massive man with ritual scars covering his bare chest and a 2-handed sword that looked like it could cleave a person in half. Well, well, he grinned, showing teeth filed to points. Looks like we found ourselves a man and his little blue pets. The pets will fetch a good price off-world. Ethan stepped in front of the girls, drawing his knife with his good hand. His sword arm was useless with the crossbow bolt through his shoulder, but he'd fought with worse injuries before. Run when I tell you to, he said quietly to the girls. No, Kira said firmly. She pulled a small hunting bow from beneath her cloak, one of the weapons Ethan had made for her. We fight together or we die together. That's what families do. Before Ethan could protest, she had an arrow nocked and drawn. Her first shot took the leftmost raider in the throat, dropping him instantly. Her second arrow wounded the man on the right, but the leader was already charging. Ethan met his rush with desperate skill. The big man's sword was powerful but clumsy. Ethan ducked under a swing that would have decapitated him, scoring a deep cut across the raider's thigh with his knife. Behind him, he heard Zara's voice raised in one of her calming songs. It seemed like madness in the middle of a battle, until he realized what she was doing. From beyond the smoke came an answering howl, long, mournful, and very close. Frost and her pack had come to investigate the disturbance. The wounded raider screamed as the wolves emerged from the haze like blue-furred nightmares. The pack leader leaped onto the man's back, bearing him to the ground, while the others spread out to surround the remaining fighter. The big raider with the two-handed sword looked around at the wolves, then at Ethan with his bloody knife, then at Kira with another arrow already knocked. "This ain't over," he snarled, but he was backing away. "Yes, it is," Ethan said simply and threw his knife. The blade took the man in the chest and he fell backward into the burning wreckage of a cart. With the immediate threat neutralized, they climbed through the damaged palisade and into the blue-leafed forest beyond. Behind them, Marcera Colony continued to burn, the smoke visible for miles in the clear air. Ethan's shoulder throbbed with every step, but he pushed forward. They needed to get as far from the settlement as possible before the raiders finished their looting and started tracking survivors. "Where will we go?" Zara asked in her small voice. It was a good question. The colony had been their only source of supplies and trade goods. Out here in the wilderness, they would have to rely entirely on their own skills. "There's an old mining station in the Thornwood Hills," Ethan said, pausing to rest against a blue-bark tree. "Been abandoned for years, but the buildings should still be intact. We can shelter there while we figure out our next move." Kira was examining their surroundings with the practiced eye of a hunter. "The trail here is soft," she observed. "Our tracks will be easy to follow." "Then we don't stick to the trail," Ethan replied. He whistled softly and frost materialized from the undergrowth like a blue shadow. "Can your pack confuse our scent trail?" The wolf seemed to understand. She led them off the main path and through a stream that would wash away their scent, then up onto rocky ground where they would leave no tracks. For hours they climbed, moving through terrain that grew increasingly wild and dangerous. Strange bird calls echoed from the canopy above, and more than once they glimpsed large shapes moving parallel to their path, predators that were keeping pace but not yet attacking. It was Zara who first noticed they were being watched by something else entirely. "Papa," she whispered, tugging on Ethan's sleeve. "In the trees, they're not hostile." Ethan followed her gaze and caught a brief glimpse of something that seemed to blend perfectly with the forest around it. A bipedal figure about 4 feet tall, with skin that shifted color to match its surroundings. "Natives," he murmured. "I've heard rumors, but never seen one." The creatures, whatever they were, kept their distance but seemed fascinated by the unusual group. Ethan could sense them moving through the canopy above, following their progress with obvious curiosity. When darkness began to fall, they found shelter in a cave that Frost's keen nose had declared safe. Ethan allowed a small fire, just enough to warm some dried meat and boil water for tea. "Tell me about your world," Bitey said to the girls as they huddled around the flames. "About your real parents." Kira stared into the fire for a long moment before speaking. "Our world was called Zeros. It was cold, with 2 moons that made the nights very bright. Papa was a hunter like you. Mama was a singer, like Zara." "What happened to them?" "The sky ships came," Zara whispered. "They burned the villages and took the children. Papa tried to fight them, but their weapons were like lightning. Mama hid us in the root cellar, but they found us anyway." "How long were you slaves before the auction?" 2 seasons, Kira said. "They kept us on different ships, different stations. I thought Zara was dead until I saw her on that platform." Ethan felt that familiar twist in his chest. 2 children who had lost everything, sold and resold like livestock, somehow finding the strength to protect each other. "You're not slaves anymore," he said firmly. "You're my daughters, and whatever happens, we face it together." The abandoned mining station squatted in a clearing like a metal tumor on the landscape. Most of its equipment had been stripped away by scavengers over the years, but the basic structures were intact. Dormitories, a workshop, storage buildings, and most importantly, a well that still produced clean water. It's defensible, Ethan observed, examining the site with a tactical eye. The station was built on a small rise with clear sight lines in all directions. The buildings were constructed from local stone and metal, solid enough to stop most weapons. And there's good hunting nearby, Kira added. She'd already spotted several game trails leading to the water source. They spent their first week making the place livable. Ethan repaired what he could with the tools and materials they'd found, while the girls cleaned and organized their new home. Frost and her pack took up residence in a sheltered area between the buildings, creating an early warning system for approaching threats. It was during their second week that they encountered the runners. The runners were native to Marsara, bipedal creatures standing about 4 feet tall with lean muscular builds and skin that shifted color to match their surroundings. They had large, intelligent eyes and hands that could manipulate tools with surprising dexterity. The first one appeared at the edge of the clearing just after dawn, watching them with obvious curiosity. When Ethan reached for his bow, Zara placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Wait," she said. "It's not hostile." She was right. The runner showed no signs of aggression, just intense interest in their activities. When Kira began practicing with her bow, the creature moved closer, its skin shifting from brown to green to match the surrounding vegetation. "Remarkable camouflage," Ethan muttered. More runners appeared over the following days, always keeping their distance, but clearly fascinated by the newcomers. They seemed particularly interested in the girls, perhaps recognizing them as fellow non-humans in a predominantly human colony. The breakthrough came when Zara began singing one of her wordless melodies while tending their small garden. The runners crept closer and closer until finally one of them began to hum along in harmony. "They understand music." Kira breathed in amazement. From that point forward, communication became possible. The runners had a complex language of clicks, whistles, and harmonic sounds that Zara seemed to have a natural gift for interpreting. Through her translations, they learned that the creatures were indeed intelligent, with their own culture and history. They called themselves something that roughly translated as the people who dance between the shadows. Their society was built around music and movement, with different tones and rhythms conveying complex meanings. Most importantly, they knew the land better than any human colonist. They knew where to find fresh water during the dry season, which plants were edible and which were poisonous, and how to track the movement of dangerous predators. The alliance that formed between Ethan's family and the runner tribe was based on mutual benefit. The runners were fascinated by human technology and metalworking skills. In exchange for teaching them about local survival techniques, they were eager to learn about tools and weapons. Ethan found himself in the unlikely position of running a wilderness school. He taught selected runners how to forge simple metal tools, while they showed him how to weave nearly invisible snares from native fibers and how to prepare certain plants into medicines that were far more effective than anything in his medical kit. Kira excelled at the cultural exchange. Her hunting skills impressed the runners, who had never seen bow and arrow technology before. In return, they taught her their techniques for moving silently through the forest and reading the subtle signs that indicated approaching weather changes. Zara became something of a bridge between the species. Her gift for languages allowed her to master the runner's complex communication system, and her calming voice made even the most nervous of the creatures comfortable around humans. "She has the deep song," explained Whisperwind, one of the runner elders, speaking through Zara's translation. "Among our people, such voices are sacred. They can call down the rain or turn aside the great storms." Winter on Marsara was brutal. The temperature dropped below freezing, and howling winds carrying crystalline snow could strip flesh from bone in minutes. Most colonists huddled in their heated shelters and waited for spring, but Ethan's expanding family couldn't afford that luxury. Their stored supplies wouldn't last the season, which meant hunting in conditions that would challenge even experienced outdoorsmen. "The great elk migrate through the southern pass during the deepest cold," Whisperwind explained. "But the hunt is dangerous. The elk travel with the frost bears, who feed on their weakest members." Frost bears were Marsara's apex predators. Massive creatures standing 8 feet at the shoulder, with crystalline fur that made them nearly invisible in snow. They feared nothing and killed for pleasure as much as for food. "How many hunters does your tribe usually send?" Ethan asked. 20 of our finest warriors. And even then, we lose some every season. Ethan looked around at their little group, himself, two children, a pack of wolves, and a handful of runners who were brave enough to venture out in winter. By any reasonable calculation, they were woefully outmatched. We'll do it anyway, he decided, but we'll do it smart. Preparing for the winter hunt became a community effort. The runners contributed their knowledge of the migration routes and the frost bears' hunting patterns. Ethan worked around the clock, forging specialized weapons, arrows with hardened steel points that could penetrate the bear's thick hides, spear tips with barbed edges designed to cause maximum damage, and most importantly, a set of devices he called noisemakers. The frost bears hunt by sound and smell, he explained to the assembled group. But they're also territorial. If we can make them think there's a rival pack nearby, we might be able to drive them away from the elk herds. Kira contributed her own innovation, special arrows with hollow shafts that would whistle as they flew, creating the illusion of a much larger group of hunters than they actually were. Even little Zara played her part, working with the runners to develop a series of harmonic calls that could coordinate their movements across vast distances without alerting their prey. When the migration finally began, they were as ready as they could be. The southern pass was a narrow valley between towering cliffs, carved by ancient glaciers into a funnel shape that concentrated the migrating animals into a relatively small area. It was also a natural trap that the frost bears had learned to exploit over countless generations. Ethan's group took positions on the high ground overlooking the pass. Below them, the elk were already beginning to move, massive creatures with branching antlers and thick fur that looked black against the snow. Beautiful and graceful, but also incredibly dangerous if cornered. There, Kira pointed to movement among the rocks. Frost bears, at least 6 of them. The predators were positioning themselves to stampede the elk into a killing zone where the valley narrowed even further. It was an intelligent hunting strategy that had been refined over millennia. Remember the plan, Ethan said quietly. We're not trying to kill the bears. We're trying to convince them to hunt somewhere else. The first phase went perfectly. When the frost bears made their move, Ethan's group responded with their noisemakers and whistling arrows, creating a cacophony that suggested a massive rival hunting party was already in the area. Several of the bears hesitated, confusion evident in their body language. But their alpha, a scarred veteran with one missing eye, seemed to realize they were being deceived. The massive creature reared up on its hind legs and roared a challenge that echoed off the canyon walls like thunder. "So much for the easy way," Ethan muttered, reaching for his spear. What followed was less a battle than a chaotic dance of death played out on treacherous, snow-covered terrain. The frost bears split their attention between the elk herd and this new threat, but they were predators to their core. They wouldn't be frightened away. Ethan found himself facing the scarred alpha in single combat, while around them the winter hunt devolved into a 3-way melee between bears, elk, and hunters. The alpha was everything the stories claimed: fast despite its size, intelligent enough to anticipate attacks, and possessed of claws that could split rocks. Its one good eye fixed on Ethan with obvious hatred, recognizing him as the architect of this disruption. They circled each other in the snow, breath steaming in the frigid air. The bear feinted left, then struck right with lightning speed, but Ethan had fought enough predators to recognize the tactic. He rolled away from the claws and came up with his spear aimed at the creature's throat. The point struck home, but not deeply enough to be fatal. The alpha roared in fury and pain, swiping at Ethan with enough force to shatter bone. Above them, Kira was proving that her archery skills weren't limited to stationary targets. Her arrows found their marks with surgical precision, driving back a younger bear that had been trying to flank her father's position. Meanwhile, Zara's voice rose over the case in one of her calming songs. To Ethan's amazement, several of the elk actually responded to her call, moving away from the main battle and towards safety at the far end of the valley. The runners fought with a fluid grace that was beautiful to watch, their camouflaged skin making them nearly invisible as they struck with poisoned darts and then melted back into the landscape. But it was Frost and her pack that turned the tide. The wolves had been waiting for the right moment, and when the alpha bear turned its attention to Ethan, they struck from behind. 6 wolves against 1 bear should have been an even match. But Frost had been studying the frost bear's fighting techniques. Instead of attacking as a group, the wolves struck in sequence, one from the left to force the bear to turn, then another from the right, then a third from behind. Each attack was brief and precise, designed to wear down their massive opponent rather than achieve a quick kill. The battle lasted less than an hour, but when the snow settled, the landscape had been transformed. Two of the younger Frost Bears lay dead, along with one of Frost's pack and a runner warrior named Swift Shadow, who had died protecting Zara from a charging bear. The Alpha, wounded but still alive, retreated with its surviving pack members. The elk, free from immediate threat, continued their migration toward the southern feeding grounds. "We did it," Kira said, hardly believing their success. But Ethan was already thinking ahead. They had meat enough to last the winter, and the hides would provide crucial materials for clothing and shelter. More importantly, they had proven that cooperation between species was not only possible but devastatingly effective. Word of their successful hunt spread through the underground networks that connected Marsara's scattered communities. Refugees from the destroyed colony began arriving at their door. Escaped slaves, displaced families, traders who had lost everything to the scavenger raids. Each newcomer brought skills and knowledge that strengthened their growing settlement. Maria Santos, a former colonial engineer, helped them design better shelters and water management systems. Jim Walking Bear, a Native American tracker whose ancestors had survived the American frontier, taught them advanced hunting and survival techniques. Dr. Sarah Chen, a xenobiologist who had been researching Marsara's native species before the colony fell, provided invaluable insights into local ecology. But the most significant addition was Cora Bluesong, a Syrian adult who had escaped from a mining camp in the Northern Territories. She was the first adult of Kira and Zara's species that either girl had seen since their parents' deaths. "Your daughters speak the old language beautifully," Cora told Ethan in accented English. "But there are customs, traditions, songs of power that they have not learned. If you will permit, I would teach them the ways of our people." Ethan found himself in the unexpected position of mediating between cultures. The Zirian traditions were important to the girl's sense of identity, but some of them conflicted with the practical necessities of survival in their current situation. "The bonding hunt is sacred," Cora explained when Kira reached her 7th birthday. "A young hunter must face a great predator alone, with only traditional weapons, to prove readiness for adulthood." "She's 7 years old," Ethan protested. "She's not ready to face a frost bear or a pack hunter alone." "The hunt scales to the hunter's abilities," Cora replied. "For one so young, perhaps a blue wolf or a thorn cat would be appropriate." Kira herself settled the debate. "I want to do it," she said quietly. "I need to know who I am, not just who I'm becoming." The bonding hunt took place in early spring, when the snows were beginning to melt, but the predators were at their hungriest after the long winter. Kira would go into the wilderness alone, carrying only a traditional Zirian hunting spear and a curved knife. She would not return until she had faced and defeated a predator worthy of her age and skill. Ethan wanted to follow at a distance, but Cora and the other Zirian refugees who had joined them insisted that would invalidate the trial. The young hunter must truly be alone, with only her own courage and skill to rely on. "She has been well trained," Cora assured him, "by you and by the runners and by life itself. Trust in what you have taught her." For 3 days, Ethan paced the settlement like a caged animal. Zara tried to comfort him with her songs, but even her calming voice couldn't ease his worry. On the 4th day, Kira returned. She walked into the settlement at dawn, bloody but triumphant, dragging behind her the carcass of a thorn cat, a 6-foot predator with razor-sharp spines along its back and claws that could disembowel a full-grown man. "It was sleeping in a cave," she reported matter-of-factly. "I waited for it to come out to hunt, then challenged it in the open where I had room to maneuver." The battle had been brief but vicious. The thorn cat's spines had opened several cuts on Kira's arms and legs, but her spear had found its heart on the first thrust. According to the Zirian tradition, she was now considered a full hunter, with all the rights and responsibilities that entailed. That evening, they held a feast to celebrate her success. The thorn cat meat was tough and gamey, but it tasted like victory. Their growing prosperity didn't go unnoticed by the outside world. Colonial Administrator Pierce, who had survived the destruction of Marsara Colony, arrived one day with a squad of armed guards and an official warrant. "Ethan Hatch," he announced in his thin, reedy voice, "you are under arrest for harboring illegal aliens, interference with colonial authority, and seditious conspiracy against lawful government. Ethan emerged from the workshop where he'd been forging new tools, his hands still black with soot from the forge. Around him, the settlement's inhabitants, human, Xerian, and runner alike, gathered to watch the confrontation. Whose authority? Ethan asked calmly. The Terran Colonial Administration has appointed me as acting governor of this territory, Pierce declared, producing an official-looking document. All settlements must register with colonial authority and comply with species segregation protocols. Kira stepped up beside her father, her hand resting on the hilt of her knife. At 7 years old, she looked like a miniature warrior, scarred and confident. This is our land, she said clearly. We built it with our own hands. You have no legal standing, alien, Pierce sneered. Under colonial law, non-humans cannot own property or establish settlements. That's when Whisperwind spoke up, his words translated by Zara. He says the law you speak of is the law of the sky people, not the law of the land. The land recognizes only those who tend it with respect. Pierce's face flushed red. I don't need legal philosophy from savages. You have 1 hour to gather your personal effects and abandon this illegal settlement. Anyone who resists will be shot as a terrorist. Ethan looked around at the faces surrounding him, the people who had become his extended family, the community they had built together from nothing. Children of multiple species played together in the dust. Adults shared tools and knowledge across species lines. Runners and wolves worked alongside humans and Xerians in harmony. It was worth fighting for. We're not leaving, he said simply. Pierce signaled to his guards, hard-faced men with military-grade weapons. Then you're all under arrest. Deadly forces authorized. What happened next became legend among the scattered settlements of Marsara. Ethan drew his sword, the steel singing as it cleared the sheath. Beside him, Kira knocked an arrow to her bow. Around the settlement, runners seemed to melt into the landscape as their camouflage activated. From the forest, the haunting howl of wolves rose into the afternoon sky. Last chance, Pierce called out. Surrender now or... His words were cut off as Kira's arrow sprouted from his shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing into one of his own guards. The battle that followed was brief but decisive. Pierce's guards were professional soldiers with superior weapons, but they were fighting on unfamiliar terrain against an enemy that knew every rock and tree. The runners struck from ambush, their poisoned darts causing paralysis and disorientation. The wolves attacked with pack tactics refined by generations of predator evolution. The human and Xerian defenders fought with the desperate courage of people protecting their homes and families. When the dust settled, Pierce and his surviving guards were in full retreat toward the distant colonial outposts, leaving behind their wounded and most of their equipment. That evening, as they tended their wounds and counted their dead, Ethan called a meeting of all the settlement's inhabitants. Humans, Xerians, and runners gathered around the central fire as the first stars appeared in Marsara's alien sky. Today we crossed a line, he said, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. We fought colonial authority and won. But they'll be back, and next time they'll bring more soldiers and heavier weapons. Murmurs of concern rippled through the crowd, but Ethan raised his hand for silence. So we have a choice, he continued. We can scatter, hide, hope they forget about us, or we can stand together and build something worth dying for. Dr. Chen stood up from her place by the fire. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we declare independence, Ethan said. Not just from the colonial administration, but from the whole system that says some species are worth more than others. That says the strong have the right to enslave the weak. The discussion that followed lasted deep into the night. There were practical concerns. How could they defend themselves against superior military forces? How would they trade with other settlements? What would happen to family members still living in colonial territory? But by dawn, the decision was unanimous. They would stand together as free beings, regardless of species or origin. Zara, now 8 years old and fluent in multiple languages, helped draft their Declaration of Independence in Human Standard, Xerian script, and Runner Harmonic notation. The document began, "We, the free inhabitants of the Thornwood Territory, declare ourselves to be a sovereign and independent community. We reject all forms of slavery, discrimination, and species-based hierarchy. We claim the right to defend ourselves, to trade freely, and to live according to our own customs and laws. The colonial response was swift and brutal. Within a month, 3 settlements that had declared solidarity with Thornwood were attacked by mercenary forces. The survivors who made it to Ethan's territory brought stories of atrocities that hardened even the most peaceful inhabitants' resolve. "They're making examples," Dr. Chen reported after examining the refugees. "Anyone who opposes colonial authority is being labeled a terrorist and treated accordingly." Ethan studied the tactical situation with his small council of advisors. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they had advantages the colonials couldn't match: intimate knowledge of the terrain, alliances with native species, and most importantly, something worth fighting for. "We can't win a conventional war," he admitted, "but we don't have to. We just have to make occupation too costly to maintain." What followed was a campaign of guerrilla warfare that would be studied by military historians for generations. Small groups of mixed-species fighters struck at colonial supply convoys, communication stations, and isolated outposts, then melted back into the wilderness like ghosts. Kira, despite her youth, proved to be a natural guerrilla leader. Her ability to move silently through hostile terrain, combined with her tactical intelligence, made her invaluable for reconnaissance missions. Zara's gift for languages allowed her to coordinate between different resistance cells scattered across the planet. Her calming voice could convince frightened refugees to trust their rescuers, and her songs could carry coded messages across vast distances. Even Frost Wolfpack played their part, serving as messengers and early warning systems for the human settlements. The war might have continued indefinitely, a bloody stalemate between colonial forces and the scattered resistance, if not for an unexpected development. Dr. Chen's research into Marsara's ecology had uncovered something remarkable. The planet's ecosystem was far more interconnected than anyone had realized. The blue-leafed forests, the migrations of native animals, even the behavior of predators like the frost bears, all followed patterns that suggested a form of planetary intelligence. "It's not conscious in the way we understand consciousness," she explained to the council, "but there's definitely a form of communication happening at the cellular level. The trees are sharing information. The animals are responding to chemical signals we can barely detect. The whole planet is essentially one enormous organism." This discovery coincided with disturbing reports from colonial settlements. Crops were failing despite adequate rainfall and soil conditions. Native animals were avoiding human settlements entirely, disrupting hunting and trapping operations. Even the weather seemed to be turning against the colonists, with unprecedented storms and temperature fluctuations. "The planet is rejecting us," Maria Santos realized. "All of us. It's trying to cleanse itself of human presence." But the rejection wasn't uniform. The mixed-species settlements like Thornwood were largely unaffected. If anything, the local ecosystem seemed to be supporting their efforts. "It's the integration," Whisperwind explained through Zara's translation. "We work with the land, not against it. We listen to its voice and respect its needs. The sky people only take and never give back." The ecological crisis forced a reconsideration of the entire conflict. Colonial settlements began experiencing complete crop failures and aggressive animal behavior that made expansion impossible. Meanwhile, the integrated communities thrived. Governor Pierce, desperate to maintain colonial authority, ordered increasingly harsh crackdowns on the terrorist settlements. But his forces found themselves fighting not just human rebels, but the planet itself. Pierce made his final gambit. He sent word to the nearest colonial military base, requesting a full regiment of soldiers with heavy weapons. The message would take months to reach its destination, and the response would take months more. But Pierce was convinced that overwhelming force was the only solution. In the meantime, the ecological crisis worsened. Colonial settlements that had remained neutral found themselves facing the same problems as everyone else: failed crops, hostile wildlife, and increasingly severe weather. Ethan saw the opportunity and seized it. Working through underground networks, he reached out to every settlement on Marsara, colonial, independent, and integrated alike. "We can fight each other and all die separately," he broadcast on every frequency. "Or we can stand together and maybe live." Pierce's response to the Planetary Alliance was swift and brutal. Using every soldier at his disposal and the promise of rich rewards, he assembled the largest military force Marsara had ever seen. Mercenaries, colonial guards, and hired thugs converged on Thornwood with horses, war machines, and enough conventional weapons to level a city. Thornwood, as the symbolic heart of the resistance, became the primary target. Catapults hurled burning stones at the settlement, while battalions of soldiers advanced with shields and pikes, determined to crush the rebellion once and for all. But the settlement had been preparing for this moment. Underground tunnels carved into the hills provided shelter and escape routes, while carefully planned traps turned the approaches into killing grounds. Ethan found himself commanding a desperate defense against impossible odds. Mounted cavalry charged their lines while foot soldiers pressed forward behind massive shields, all supported by siege engines that turned buildings to rubble with each impact. "Papa?" Kira said as they crouched behind a barricade while stones whistled overhead. "Are we going to die?" Ethan looked at his daughter, scarred, brave, too young to be fighting for her life, and felt something break inside his chest. She was 9 years old and had already seen more violence than most adults. "Not today," he promised. The battle raged for 5 days. Pierce's forces, expecting to overwhelm primitive rebels with superior numbers and equipment, instead encountered a coordinated defense that utilized every advantage the terrain could provide. Runners struck from ambush using their camouflage abilities, then disappeared before the soldiers could respond. Wolf packs harried the flanks of advancing troops, never engaging directly but constantly forcing them to watch multiple directions at once. The Syrian refugees fought with a fury born of desperation, knowing that capture meant a return to slavery. Human colonists who had joined the alliance discovered that freedom was worth dying for. And through it all, Zara's voice rose in songs that seemed to call down the planet's wrath upon their enemies. Storms struck at crucial moments. Wild animals attacked colonial positions, and the very ground seemed to shift beneath the soldiers' feet. On the 5th day, as Ethan's ammunition ran low and his defensive positions crumbled, he made a decision that would define the rest of his life. "I'm going to Pierce's command post," he announced to his startled council. "That's suicide," Dr. Chen protested. "He's got it fortified with his best soldiers. What could you possibly accomplish?" Ethan smiled grimly. "I know something about Pierce that might give us an edge. He's a coward at heart. All bullies are when you strip away their advantages." The plan was desperate. Infiltrate Pierce's heavily guarded command center during the chaos of battle and force a confrontation with the colonial administrator. It had almost no chance of success. "I'm coming with you," Kira said firmly. "Absolutely not. You'll need someone who can move silently and shoot accurately in tight spaces," she pointed out with 9-year-old logic. "That's me." "And you'll need someone who can create a diversion," Zara added. "I can make the animals turn against them." Ethan looked at his daughters, his children by choice, if not by blood, and felt pride were with terror in his chest. They were asking to join him on what was almost certainly a suicide mission. "We're family," Kira said simply. "We fight together or we die together." Getting to Pierce's command post required crossing a battlefield swarming with enemy soldiers. But Ethan had advantages that conventional military thinking didn't account for. The runners had mapped every hidden path through the surrounding hills. Frostpack could create diversions and provide early warning of patrol movements. Most importantly, Zara's voice could turn the local wildlife into allies. They moved through the night like ghosts, avoiding patrols and slipping past sentries who were focused on the main battle. Kira's forest skills proved invaluable. She could read tracks in starlight and move without disturbing a single leaf. "The command post is in the old colonial hall," she whispered, studying the fortified building through the trees. 2 guards at the front, probably more inside. Pierce had chosen his fortress well. The stone building was defensible and gave him clear views of the battlefield. But it also trapped him, and Ethan intended to use that against him. The infiltration required perfect timing. While Zara's songs drew every wolf and predator in the area toward the outer perimeter, creating chaos among Pierce's troops, Ethan and Kira slipped through a service entrance that the runners had identified. Inside, they found Pierce exactly where Ethan expected, hunched over maps and reports, surrounded by nervous advisors who were beginning to realize their overwhelming advantage wasn't as overwhelming as they'd hoped. The confrontation, when it came, was almost anticlimactic. Colonial Administrator Pierce looked up from his tactical displays as they entered his command chamber, his thin face going pale at their appearance. Hello, Pierce, Ethan said calmly, his crossbow trained on the administrator's chest. I think it's time we talked. The debate that followed lasted hours. Pierce was a career bureaucrat trained to follow orders and maintain order at any cost. But he was also a man who had once believed in justice and progress. You don't understand the situation, he said, showing them colonial reports spread across his desk. The homeworlds are overcrowded. We need resources, new territories for expansion. The aliens are just in the way. The aliens have names, Kira said, speaking for the first time since they had entered the room. I'm Kira. My sister is Zara. We're not obstacles or resources. We're people. Pierce's eyes fixed on the blue-skinned girl with visible surprise. You speak remarkably well for your kind. For my kind, Kira replied with dignity. I speak 4 languages, can track game through any terrains, and have killed predators twice my size to protect my family. What exactly is my kind, Administrator? You're not human. Neither are the wolves that hunt with us, or the runners who share their knowledge, or the trees that give us shelter. But we all live. We all love. We all want to protect our children. What makes humanity so special that only we deserve to exist? Outside, the sounds of battle were changing. Pierce's advisors kept glancing toward the windows as reports came in of increasing chaos among their forces. Zara stepped forward, her young voice carrying the weight of ancient wisdom. Survival isn't just about taking what you need, Administrator. It's about what kind of life you choose to preserve. She began to sing, one of her wordless melodies that seemed to resonate in the bones. And as her voice rose, the sounds of battle outside began to change. The clash of weapons grew more distant, replaced by something else entirely. Pierce went to the window and stared in amazement. His soldiers were not fleeing. They were laying down their weapons. Across the battlefield, humans and aliens were beginning to talk rather than fight. The ceasefire began with a single transmitted word from Pierce's command post. Hold. The administrator's voice carried across all communication frequencies, ordering his forces to suspend military operations pending further review. The siege engines fell silent. Soldiers on both sides pulled back to defensive positions. In the silence that followed, delegations from across Marcera began to gather at the neutral ground between the armies. Humans, Xyrians, runners, and even representatives of species that had previously avoided contact with off-worlders came together to negotiate a new way of living. The talks were difficult. Centuries of mistrust couldn't be overcome overnight, and there were practical concerns that seemed almost insurmountable. How could multiple species with different biological needs share the same territory? How could justice work when different cultures had completely different concepts of crime and punishment? But gradually solutions emerged. The runner's gift for camouflage made them natural mediators. They could observe disputes without being seen, providing neutral perspectives on conflicts. The Xyrians' musical communication methods allowed for emotional nuances that normal speech couldn't convey. Human technology provided tools that could benefit everyone. Most importantly, Marcera's planetary ecosystem responded positively to integrated communities. Where different species worked together in harmony, the land itself seemed to flourish. Pierce himself, humbled by his encounter with Ethan's family, became an unexpected advocate for the new arrangement. The colonial charter was rewritten to recognize the rights of all intelligent species, and Thornwood was designated as the capital of the first truly integrated territory on Marcera. 8 years later, Ethan stood on a hill overlooking New Thornwood, watching his daughters play with a mixed group of human, Xyrian, and runner children. The settlement had been rebuilt as a model of interspecies cooperation, with architecture that accommodated different physiological needs and cultural preferences. Kira, now 14, was teaching younger children how to use a bow. Her blue skin had darkened with maturity, and the scars from her various battles had faded to thin silver lines that she wore with pride. She moved with the confidence of a seasoned hunter and warrior, but her laugh was still that of a young girl discovering joy. Zara, 11, was working with a group of runner elders to transcribe their oral histories into written form. Her gift for languages had evolved into something approaching genius. She could communicate with virtually any species they encountered, and her diplomatic skills had prevented more conflicts than anyone could count. "Papa," she called out in her clear voice, "Swift Current wants to know if you will come to the Harmony Circle tonight. They're performing the song of new beginnings. Ethan smiled, feeling peace settle into his bones like warm sunlight. The wars were over. New settlers arrived regularly from other colonies, but they came seeking cooperation rather than conquest. The various species of Marsara had learned to live together, not in spite of their differences, but because of them. "Tell Swift Current I'll be honored to attend," he called back. As the alien sun set over his adopted world, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, Ethan reflected on the long journey that had brought him here. He'd come to Marsara searching for his missing brother and found something far more valuable. A family that transcended species, a community that proved different peoples could live together in harmony. Behind him, Frost, now ancient by wolf standards but still proud, lay in the grass with her latest litter of pups. Some were pure wolf, others showed signs of genetic mixing with other Marsaran predators. Evolution in action, adaptation to new circumstances. The stars were coming out now, strange constellations in an alien sky that had become more familiar to him than Earth's patterns. This was home. This was worth fighting for. This was the future.